Hi, everyone. So this video is for my fellow teachers out there. This year, I went through a grading practices group. I don't know, I'm going to call it a project where a lot of teachers looked at how they grade and whether or not what we do is equitable for all students. And we were given at the beginning of this program a list of different possible changes that we could make in our grading practices that might make our grades more equitable. So we were asked to make at least one change with how we grade and progress throughout the year, reviewing it, talking to our colleagues about how it's going, and learning from it. So this started in July, I think, and then I already kind of think about what we're going to do, and then implement it in August, and then I carried it out through the entire school year, all the way up till the end of May. And what I want to do with you is kind of tell you what I did and how it affected my students and their grades, and me also, I guess. So first, I want to talk about what some of the changes were I made. So some terms you might hear me use in this video, just FYI for you. One might be ELO, which means essential learning outcome. This is like mastery learning. So I'm a Spanish teacher, so maybe, for example, I want my students to learn how to conjugate AR verbs, and they have to know how to do that. That's going to be an ELO. If they can't show me that they've demonstrated mastery of that with at least a 75%, then they don't pass the class. So that's an ELO. Plus period is this fantastic opportunity for students where 4 times a week they can get extra help or remediation from one of their teachers. So my first period class will have a plus period 1 day a week where they can get help from me or retake these ELOs, or if they're all cut out, they could go and see another teacher. So this is a huge opportunity for my students. A lot of them take advantage of it. Some of them don't, which is unfortunate. The VHL, I'll probably say that a few times. That's where my students do their homework online. And then homework equals practice. Just a note for you in that I made a change where I don't call traditionally what is homework anymore homework, because I don't care where my students do it. This wasn't my original idea, by the way. But really all it is just I want them to do some extra practice. So going back to that idea of AR verbs, I want them to practice that a little bit more outside of the normal class time. So they might spend 5 minutes on it, practicing it, whether it's while they're eating lunch or at home. I don't care, just as long as they get that extra practice in. So the 3 changes I made are: 1, no penalty for late work; 2, most recent score on retakes; and 3, homework optional. So the number 2, what that means is in the past with these ELOs, what I did was, so let's say an ELO was those AR verbs and the student earned 50%. So they didn't pass it. They have to retake it. They retake it, they get 100%. I averaged out those 2 scores. They got a 75. With the most recent scores, if they got a 50% the first time, they retake it, they get 100%. They get that 100% on that ELO. So this is going to positively affect their overall test averages in my class. And tests are worth 35% of their grades. So I'm going to see a little bit of a higher grade average on those tests because of that, which is okay with me. And then I'm going to get into that homework optional thing quite a bit in a second. I'm going to talk about right now how each of these things affected everybody. So no penalty for late work. It's just some pros. The students were less stressed, obviously. So if I give them a project, I'm going to say it's due next Wednesday, but they don't get it done Wednesday, they're not going to be freaking out. They turn it in Thursday or Friday, it's fine. It's not going to get graded as soon because now it's at the bottom of the list, but they're not freaking out. And also, there's less pressure from me, because if a kid's absent, I'm not going to, and they come back and they've got like 1 more day to do their project, I'm not going to be all over them. I'm just going to be like, okay, get it in when you can, and then we'll grade it. So it's a little bit less pressure for me. I want to, before I move to the cons, although actually there's probably in the cons. So the first one, it's the first one, the potential end of semester chaos. So for me, I don't do a lot of projects, and the homework is automatically graded online. So it's not that big of a deal for me. But I could see, for example, maybe an English teacher who does essays. You don't want to get 150 essays turned into you at the end of the semester, because that would just be ridiculous. So I'm not saying you should do it, because that could potentially be a con, but it's something you might want to think about. The random assignments coming in. So I could have kids coming up to me during their plus period saying, I need to do this project, and they might want 4 different directions for 4 different assignments. So it's me digging up directions or finding them in their Google Classroom or whatever. So that can be a hassle. There is definitely less student responsibility, because if I say you can turn this in whenever you want to turn it in, some students, I probably would have done the same thing in high school, would have been like, okay, I'm not going to work on it right now. Procrastinate, right? And then Oh, the digging up old directions rubrics, I already mentioned that. So the late work wasn't a big deal for me. The second one, the most recent score on retakes, some pros, subject matter mastery. So even if I have a kid who maybe they get an 80% on an ELO, which is a passing grade, in the past, I would have said, that's it, you're done. You can't retake it. But now if a kid wants to retake it and get those extra 20%, they can do that. And I did have students doing that, even though they didn't have to. They wanted to get that extra bump in their grade or just demonstrate to themselves that they can do better. So it was good for those higher learning kids. And of course, for the struggling learners, they can still get 100% on that ELO. And they can keep their grade up higher rather than just averaging it out. So there is a pro to that. If a kid has a bad day, if there's a test, take a test, and you just completely forget something or something's happening at home or whatever, it's not the end of the world if you don't pass an ELO, because you can still retake it and you can still get 100%. And you can retake it for as many times as you want to. And then I think I just mentioned this, but it is good for struggling students because they can take, if they need to take a couple extra weeks to learn it, they can do that. The cons is there's a possibility for lack of initial effort. If the kid knows that the ELO on AR verbs is on this next test, they haven't studied for it or prepared for it, been working very hard in class, I can just retake it. That can happen, and that does happen, and that's frustrating. I'll talk about the way I've tried to avoid that a little bit in a minute. And then, of course, it is more work for me because it's just retakes. And it is a lot of work, but it's, I think, good for the kids. Homework optional. Pros, a student can opt out if practice is unnecessary. So I did have some kids in my class, that was a minority, but I did have some kids who earned an A at the end of the semester and got another failing grade in their homework. Homework, by the way, is worth 0% of their grade. And they could do this because when they were in class, they were working hard, listening, participating, doing every activity they did in class. So they didn't feel like they needed that extra practice. And it turned out they didn't. The thing is that the kids that really need the extra practice don't do it. And you'll see that when I show you my graph of data in a minute. The cons is that students will often choose to not do the practice when it is most needed, which is kind of what I just said. So the way I made, I can go back. The way I made homework and the most recent scores in ELOs kind of tied together is if a student fails an ELO, they can't just come up to me the next day and say, I want to redo it. Because more than likely, based on several years of experience with this, the student hasn't prepared themselves to retake it, either by getting extra help from me or watching one of my instructional videos online. They just want to try and retake it and get it over with. So to avoid the time wasting that is sometimes, if a student fails an ELO and they do not have at least a 75% grade on their homework, they have to go back and do all of their missing homework assignments. And I'm going to show you why it is super important in just a second, why the kids do their homework or need to do their homework. So what's happening is kid fails ELO and then they just don't do the homework. And maybe like a month later, like, oh, I want to retake that ELO, and they still haven't done their homework yet. And they got to sit down and do their homework, which they should have done in the first place, because then they probably would have passed the ELO in the first place. Let me just show you this data because for me, it's super interesting. This is for both of my Spanish 2 classes combined. The blue line on the chart is the grade in the class, and then the red line is the grade on the tests. And at the bottom, it says A, B, C, D, or F on homework. So if I look at this, sorry about this, but the kids that have an A on, oh, is it going to go away? Okay, the kids that have an A average throughout the entire semester on homework have an average grade in the class of over 100%, because I offer extra credit sometimes. And then they have an average grade on the tests at about a 95%. Kids that have a B average on homework throughout the semester have an average grade in the class of like a 95, and then the test average is like an 85. You can kind of see the pattern, right? You have a C average on homework, your grade in the class is here, your test average is here, D, you're over here. So obviously it goes together. The better you do on the homework, or practice, as I call it, the better you do in the class. The thing that's most interesting for this for me is that every time after every single test we took in the class, I would share this data with the students. And I say, look at this. The students that did their homework got this grade. The students that didn't do the homework got this grade down here. And every time, and this was also last semester through Spanish 1, it was the exact same thing. I would show them the data. This is how well you do on your test if you do your homework. And it was always the same thing. The higher the grade on the homework or practice, the higher the grade on the test. So you'd think that logically, a student would be like, oh, I should probably start doing my homework. But that's not the case. this is super interesting. Over here, see the homework average. We went through 6 chapters or lessons, I call them. On the first one, the students had a 58% average on their homework. And it goes 50, 45. So the thing that's weird about this is that you would think that anybody that has any sort of a logical thought would be like, oh, I'm going to start doing my homework more. But what you can see is that the students actually continue to do it less and less and less when they really need to do it the opposite, do more and more. And it was super frustrating. I'll probably do this again next year just because what I have proven to the students and to myself is that if you do the extra practice, you do better in my class. And there's undisputable evidence of it right here. So I'm going to show that to the students in my Spanish 1 class next year, because I'll have those in the fall. And hopefully they will learn from my Spanish 2 students' mistakes that they made this semester. Let's see. The other things, I'll still do the most recent score on retakes because the kids like it, and it gives them an opportunity just to earn a higher grade, I'm fine with that. No penalty for late work, I'll probably continue to do that just because it's not really a big deal for me. I don't like the idea that the kids don't learn to be responsible, but it's helpful for those kids that have problems or they're struggling with stuff like that. So I'll keep supporting them in that sense. I think that's it. If you guys have questions for me about any of this, let me know. These are just some experiments I went through this year with my grading practices. And I encourage you to evaluate what you're doing and see if there's some changes you might want to make, because you might find something that works for you. So thanks for watching. And again, drop a comment if you have any questions or other ideas for me. All right. Thanks for watching. Adios.